The mansion was silent again. Silence was all 13-year-old Daniel ever knew. The son of billionaire industrialist Richard Holden, he lived inside walls larger than most apartment buildings, surrounded by people paid to stay close but never get too near. His world was patterns, routines, and an ache he couldn't name. He lined up his toy cars in perfect order along the windowsill each morning and stared through the glass at a sky that never answered back. Downstairs, the house moved with mechanical rhythm. Chefs, chauffeurs, cleaners, everyone following invisible lines drawn by money. But no one talked to Daniel except when necessary. The staff had been warned. He doesn't like to be touched. He doesn't understand you. Keep your distance. And so they did. Until she arrived. Her name was Grace. She came quietly one grey afternoon, clutching an old handbag and wearing a second-hand uniform too big for her frame. The agency had sent her as a last-minute replacement. The boy's difficult, the butler warned. Just keep things tidy, avoid the third-floor east wing, and don't make noise. Grace nodded. But as she scrubbed floors and changed sheets, she heard the faintest humming. Soft, deliberate, a sound like someone trying to talk without words. Following it, she found herself at the far end of a long corridor, where a half-open door revealed a room scattered with puzzles, books, and hundreds of tiny cars. Daniel sat on the carpet, eyes fixed on the vehicles, humming the same low note again and again. Grace froze. The boy didn't look up. She watched quietly for a moment, noticing how carefully he moved each car, adjusting wheels until they all faced the same direction. There was patience in him, and loneliness. She wanted to say hello, but the memory of the butler's warning echoed, he doesn't like anyone near him. Still, something in her heart whispered, try. Those are nice cars, she said softly. He didn't answer, but his fingers stilled for just a heartbeat, a tiny reaction that felt like a door cracking open. Grace smiled gently. My son used to have one like that, blue with white stripes. He loved it, still no reply. But when she turned to leave, she heard something move. One little car rolled toward her foot, stopping just by her shoe. She looked back. Daniel was watching. Not smiling, not speaking, but watching. From that moment, she knew she couldn't treat him like a ghost in his own home. The next morning, she came early and cleaned quietly in his room again. He didn't protest. By the third day, she brought an old toy car she'd found at a thrift shop, faded red, missing paint, one wheel taped. She placed it near his collection. This one's a little broken, she said, but it still runs. Daniel didn't touch it for hours, but when she passed by later that afternoon, she saw it sitting perfectly lined up with all the others. Grace's chest ached in a way she hadn't felt in years. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Daniel began waiting for her, always pretending not to, but she saw the signs. When she entered his room, he would hum a little louder or glance for half a second before returning to his puzzles. He began leaving small things where she could find them, a drawing under the table, a car on her cleaning cart. The staff started whispering. He lets her near him. The butler didn't like it. Don't overstep, Grace, the family wouldn't approve. But Grace wasn't thinking about rules. She thought about the boy who never spoke, but somehow communicated everything with silence. One morning, she brought in an old tune from her childhood, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, and hummed it softly while dusting his bookshelves. Daniel turned sharply, eyes wide as if the melody unlocked something buried. His hand twitched toward the piano in the corner. Untouched, dusty. Do you play? She asked. He didn't respond. But that night, after everyone left, soft piano notes echoed faintly through the house. The next day, Grace found him sitting at the piano, hesitant fingers pressing one key again and again. The same note she had hummed. She sat down beside him, careful not to startle him. That's beautiful, Daniel. He didn't look up. But his hands moved faster, chasing the tune she'd planted. For the first time in her life, Grace felt like she was witnessing a miracle. Not the kind that came with bright lights or angels, but the kind that bloomed quietly, unseen by the world. Meanwhile, Richard Holden barely noticed. His life revolved around meetings, acquisitions, and headlines. He saw his son only in photographs, a distant responsibility maintained for appearances. He's in good hands, he'd tell his assistant, but when the butler reported, the maid spends too much time in the boy's room, Richard's tone turned cold. Maid? He didn't even remember her name. She sings to him, the butler added, frowning. He responds to her. That caught Richard's attention. Impossible. Yet that evening, curiosity made him climb the stairs to the east wing. Peering through the half-open door, he saw something that made him freeze. Daniel sitting beside the maid, laughing, actually laughing, as she showed him how to roll a toy car down a ramp they'd built from books. Richard couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his son laugh. For a brief moment, pride and relief crossed his face. Then pride twisted into something else. Fear, jealousy, maybe shame. How had a stranger done what he, a father with every resource, could not? He left without saying a word. The next day, Grace was summoned to the study. Richard sat behind his grand desk, silver pen glinting between his fingers. "You've been spending time with my son." Grace clasped her hands. "Yes, sir. That's not in your job description. I didn't mean any harm." He raised a hand. "He's fragile. I don't want you interfering." "Keep your distance." Her throat tightened. "With respect, sir. He's lonely. He has therapists, specialists, people who understand his condition. Do they talk to him? Do they see him?" That question landed like a crack of thunder in the quiet office. For a second, she thought he might fire her on the spot. But Richard only stared, expression unreadable. "You may go." Grace left, heart heavy. When she returned to the third floor, Daniel was waiting by the door, his way of asking, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Grace forced a smile. Of course, but she wasn't sure it was true. That night, she sat in her small rented room across town, staring at the old toy car Daniel had given her earlier. His silent thank you. She had worked for dozens of rich families before. None had felt like this. Something about that boy's quiet struggle had reached into her own scars, the ones from losing her son years ago to illness, the ones money could never heal. She couldn't abandon him, not now. The next morning she returned to the mansion early, determined to keep helping him, even if it cost her job. What she didn't know was that a tragedy was about to strike that would change everything, and force the billionaire to finally see what she saw all along. That morning, Grace noticed something wrong the moment she stepped into the mansion. The air felt heavier, the staff quieter. The butler avoided her eyes. When she reached Daniel's room, she found the door closed, locked from the outside. Panic flashed through her. She knocked softly. "Daniel?" "It's Grace." No answer. Just silence. She turned and hurried downstairs to the study, where Richard sat with two men in suits, his face drawn and pale. "You locked his door?" she asked before she could stop herself. "For his safety," he said curtly. "He had an episode last night. He broke a lamp, cut his hand." "He needs rest." Grace shook her head. "That's not how you help him." One of the men frowned. "Mr. Holden, shall we—" But Richard raised a hand to silence him. "Enough, Grace. You're dismissed for the day." She wanted to argue, but one look at his face told her words would do no good. Still, something deep inside her screamed that something wasn't right. She didn't go home. She waited outside near the servants' entrance, pretending to check her phone as the hours crawled by. Then, when the staff changed shifts and the guards were distracted, she slipped in through the back door. The hallways were dim, afternoon light slanting through tall windows. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, something she'd never noticed before. She climbed the stairs quietly and reached Daniel's door. The lock had been removed. Slowly she pushed it open. The room was a mess, papers everywhere, broken toys, a small streak of dried blood on the edge of the table. Her stomach turned. "Daniel?" she whispered. Nothing. Her eyes darted around the room. His backpack was gone, his shoes missing. Then she noticed the window slightly open. A breeze rustled the curtains. Below, muddy footprints trailed across the garden path toward the woods behind the estate. She ran. Branches whipped against her arms as she pushed through the trees, calling his name again and again. Finally, she heard a faint sound, soft crying. She followed it and found Daniel crouched under an old oak, his hand bleeding, his shirt torn. Relief flooded her. "Oh, sweetheart." She knelt beside him, but he flinched when she reached out. "It's okay," she whispered, keeping her voice calm. "You're safe now." He stared at her, breathing fast, eyes full of panic. Then he pointed shakily toward something on the ground, a small bird's nest that had fallen, two tiny chicks lying still in the dirt. She understood then. He hadn't run away from her. He had run to help something smaller, something helpless. Tears stung her eyes. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "You tried to save them." She took his hand gently and wrapped it in her scarf to stop the bleeding. "Let's go home." He hesitated, then nodded. When they stepped out of the woods, they found Richard standing by the garden path, furious and frightened at once. "Daniel!" he shouted, rushing forward. "Where have you—" He froze when he saw Grace holding his son's hand. For a moment, something raw flickered in his eyes. Relief, guilt, confusion. Then his pride took over. "What are you doing here?" He barked at Grace. "I told you to stay away!" Grace didn't let go of the boy's hand. He was scared. He didn't need a locked door. He needed someone to listen. "You don't understand his condition." "I understand loneliness," she said quietly. "I understand what it's like to cry and have nobody come." Richard's face tightened. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You think I don't care?" She looked at him steadily. "I think you don't know how to show it." For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Daniel did something no one expected. He took a step forward, reached out and touched his father's sleeve. Barely, but it was enough to break the spell. Richard froze, then slowly knelt down. His son looked at him for the first time in years and whispered something almost inaudible. "Don't lock me in." It was the first full sentence he'd spoken in months. Richard's breath caught. His hands trembled. "I won't," he whispered back. "I promise." Tears slid down Grace's cheeks as she turned away to give them privacy. The days that followed were different. Richard cancelled meetings, cleared his schedule, and spent time with his son. Grace still worked quietly in the background, but the mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum. Laughter began to echo faintly through the halls, awkward at first, then genuine. One evening Richard called her to the garden. "You were right," he said simply. "I didn't see him. I was afraid to fail him, so I kept my distance." He hesitated. "I owe you more than an apology." Grace shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just be there for him." He smiled faintly. "I intend to, but if you're willing, I'd like you to stay. Not as a maid, as part of his care. Has family." The word caught her off guard. Family. She thought of her small apartment, her empty evenings, the photo of her son she still kept by her bedside. Then she looked at Daniel sitting on the grass, humming softly as he built a tower of toy cars. "I'd like that," she said. Months passed. Spring melted into summer. Daniel was changing, more expressive, more confident, even daring to play piano again. Grace became his anchor, his translator to a world that had ignored him. And Richard, once hardened by money and loss, began to soften. He started opening charity foundations for children with developmental challenges, naming one after his son. One afternoon, as they all sat together by the piano, Daniel reached into his pocket and handed Grace something small, a red toy car. The same one she'd brought him months ago. "For you," he whispered. Her heart swelled. "Thank you, sweetheart." Richard looked at her and said, "You did the unthinkable, Grace. You taught him love." She smiled. "No, sir. He already knew love. He just needed someone to listen." As the sun dipped low, the mansion glowed with warm light and laughter. Grace's humming filled the air again, and Daniel joined in with a few clumsy piano notes that somehow fit perfectly. For the first time in years, that enormous house finally felt like a home, and for Grace, who once thought she'd lost everything, this was the miracle she never saw coming. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story touched your heart. Stay tuned for more emotional, heartwarming stories about kindness, courage, and redemption.